Many people search for God, some for their entire lives, others for brief moments of pain and sorrow, others simply because they want to know and it seems like a big question to answer. The search for God has inspired books and poetry. It inspires music and art. It inspires people to take the steps many never would but for their search for God. Some fast and pray for weeks on end. Some sit in total silence for years hoping to hear but a single word. Some give up all their possessions to follow a potential Messiah, and others dedicate their lives to the worship of a God of a religion, believing and hoping that they have found the truth of their Maker. In truth, most people who discover God quickly abandon it, and soon they find religion. Even more, find an ideology. They find stories and ideas and directions and morals and ethics. They find apologetics and reasoning and rationalizing as to why one's interpretation of God is better than another's. And then most people settle for what they can understand of God in the book they're told it inspires. They accept the God that their family teaches them is their God, or the God the culture they were raised in seems to unite around, or in some cases, the God of the people that are there to help them when they reach their lowest points and need that helping hand. God then becomes an idea that's passed down and shared, a ritual, a story, a kind deed, a being that often resembles the very people worshiping it and talking about it. And God is all of these things. But in order for them to truly understand it, they must make God separate and apart from humanity. It gains pride and sometimes physical form. It has needs and wants and desires and demands, almost always, interestingly, the same as those in the culture they're part of, never demanding more than those cultures were already demanding. And when people question the reason for these things, they are told that the God they are following has its reasons, and it being separate from man, it's a being whose ways and methods are greater and wiser than our own, not to be questioned, not to be disobeyed, but to be submitted to and honored and held to such high esteem that one should be willing to die for these beliefs. And we give over our need to experience, told often that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance in what we do not see. And then they are assured that they are special, and that through their faith they can see God, while those who lack faith can see nothing. We give over our need to experience God to embrace the belief that there is a God. We take away the idea that one can truly know there is a God with the idea that one must have faith and believe that there is a God, and claim knowledge from that which isn't known, but rather hoped for. For they feel comforted not by God, but by the idea their religion offers of a God, and that becomes good enough. And yet when people talk of their experiences of God, those that don't come off sounding like ghost stories, they seem to never notice how familiar they all are to one another, regardless of the God they worship, regardless of the religion they choose, never questioning why so many from so many other faiths have the same experience. Some warm feeling that surged through their body that said everything was going to be all right. Some momentary glimpse and understanding that all was good and all was love. And from every religion, from every cult, from every faith, from everyone that has ever helped others search for God, they all seemingly experience this breakthrough moment. Everyone has their story of how they came to believe the God they worship is real. But it is in the lack of curiosity, that lack of investigating that experience, that lack of trying to understand what that experience truly is, and instead giving it over to one's beliefs and one's ideologies, that we then begin to step away from God. For the moment, we begin to define with our mind an experience. It becomes an illusion. And this is how God has become for most people. Instead of understanding the true experience of God, the very flow and existence of God, we instead stick to our cultural definitions, defining God as others have defined it in the past, holding that this must be the God we experience, as it's the God that the people we know believes in. And oftentimes, the messiahs and prophets that have led the way have made the same mistakes. They encounter the truth of God. They experience God in all its glory and amazement, and only having their culture to fall back on, they return to the world to explain how what they experience fits into the culture they live in. For Jesus, a Palestinian Jew whose people were ruled by Romans and were desperate for a Messiah, his experience with God led him to claim he was the Son of God. For Muhammad, whose people were in flux, trying to figure out the true religion to follow, he awoken to the oneness of God, but could never believe that man could be part of that oneness. Whether it was prophets or cult leaders, messiahs or saints, they all had an experience of God that they then allowed their beliefs and faiths to cloud. For God is not faith. God is not something one must believe in to experience. for God doesn't play hide and seek with the universe. A true God can be found by anyone at any time, but a religious God cannot. Many have tried, and many have cried, wanting so desperately to find the God of their religion instead of finding the God that is always there. For the truth of God is within the infinite, and in the infinite there is no separation. There is nothing that is not it. And if there is nothing that is not it, then that means that you are it too. You are God, and everything around you is God, and every moment of existence, and every desire and action and belief, they are all God. Every faith is God. But more often than not, where there are churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples, there is separation from God. As just as you cannot find the thing you believe is completely lost, even if it's right in front of you, you will not experience what is everywhere to be experienced if you don't think it's there to be experienced. Instead, separating God from everything and calling it the work of God instead of the God that it is. But everyone who searches for God travels their own path to experiencing God. Most end up having God as a being that exists beyond them, then as a being that is infinite and everywhere outside of them. But when we truly investigate the nature of our experience, we realize that the experience of God is always us, that there can be no separation within the infinite, that that which is infinite encompasses everything, and that which encompasses everything is all things, in a way that we may never understand or consciously make sense of, but in a way that which we can all experience, each on our own path, each leading to the same conclusion, that once you let go of ideology and dogma, once you surrender culture and belief, once you give up this notion of self and person, and you embrace God in all its totality, with complete pertinacity and sagacity, you realize the true experience of God, and you realize you are one with it, and that you are perfect and complete.